My friends and I would go to the beach practically every day back in high school. Although we didn't live in the nicest homes of our small fishing town, and there was a constant lingering of rotten fish and smoke from the big factory a few miles away, the beach was the perfect place to unwind, let loose, and make memories. What more could a bunch of adventurous high school kids ask for? Plus, it was quite rare for people to go out to the beach in our little town, especially in the winter. Occasionally, a group of photographers or some van campers would stop by and spend a little time here, but the constant aroma of dead fish was too much for any tourist to handle. I'd gotten used to the smell a long time ago. It's just one of those things you have to do if you want to live in my small town. The beach was about 40 feet from trees to shore, which was ample room for horsing around, camping, or whatever else your heart desired. Although the beach was great, we spent much more time in the lush forest that begins right at the division of sand and grass. You could spend a year exploring these forests and still discover new things. We'd stumble across cave systems, old abandoned houses, a furnace, plenty of homeless people making their small encampments away from society, and my personal favorite, broken down cars. We would spend hours exploring the woods after school, smoking and getting drunk and, like I said earlier, making memories. If I had to recall 10 of my favorite memories throughout my life, at least 8 of them came from that forest along our little ocean shore. One day stands out to me more than any others, though. A day that I fear. A day that never fails to wake me up in my sleep, screaming and crying out in pain, only to lay awake until the sun begins to peek over the mountains in the distance. A day that I would work and make $1 million to remove from my memory. A day that I envision when the pastor in church mentions hell. I'm not a very fearful person. Whenever uncomfortable situations arise, I'm usually the one that takes the lead. We've, understandably, encountered a fair share of drunks and creeps in the woods, but I've never stood back or ran. I stand my ground, and I make sure that my friends are okay. It's a little ironic, because I was a 5'3" female who looks like she could barely harm a millipede, let alone piss off a drunken asshole enough that'll leave you alone. Maybe the forest gave me strength or confidence or made me seem better. Maybe the forest was an ally. I mean, I'm not one for crazy conspiracy theories, but after what happened 10 years ago, I guess I should be a little more open in my beliefs. It was about 4:30 in the evening. The sun was just starting to breathe its last few breaths before dripping down under the huge pine trees that filled the landscape for miles. Myself and 2 other friends were on the beach, setting up our tents and a few tables to play beer pong when it was darker out, just relaxing. Oddly enough, the sky was clear. The weather forecast predicted that there would be a heavy fog around the coastal areas, but there was barely a cloud in the sky. I lived on the East Coast, so we were robbed of the luxury of watching the sun take a bath in the cold ocean water. But the beauty in the sunrise made the difference worthwhile. I was watching the waves lap against the rocks in the distance when I saw something glisten a few feet away. Expecting it to be another beer bottle or a shard of glass that some asshole left behind, I was hesitant to even get up from my chair. For some reason, I did, and slowly trudged over to see what caught my eye. It was a glass bottle. A cork was the only thing separating the little folded note inside from being obliterated in the sea. I picked up the bottle and loosened the cork, which took a lot more physical strength than expected. Upon opening the bottle, I was greeted with a sickening must. Probably the expected odor that comes with air that's been trapped in a tiny bottle for years. There was a small slip of paper on the inside, which I shook to the edge and slowly pulled out with my small fingers. The slip of paper had a yellow tint, its edges dog-eared and suntanned, likely from years of floating at sea. I unraveled the folds, half expecting the ink to have faded and be greeted by an empty page. Boy, was I wrong. Inside the note were 2 coordinates, written in pristine ink that looked like a day old. I didn't know a lot about coordinates, but I did know that the numbers were relatively close to our hometown. I slowly put the slip back into the bottle, closed the cork again, and started walking back to the camp to show my friends. "What you got there, Ams?" Dave piped up as they saw the glistening object in my hand. Dave was a good person. Not your typical popular high school kid. I mean, he made his rounds, and definitely knew more people than myself or Sarah, but he never thought himself better in any way. He was always down for photo shoots, random hikes, and best of all, he was a good listener. Whenever I had something going on, I genuinely felt safe and comfortable around him, which was something rare in our quiet little town. I had a pretty deep crush on him, but I doubt he ever felt the same way. He was tall and muscular, but still had that dorky look on his face that makes any girl stumble back a little. He had short brown hair and a little mustache growing above his perfect smile. He was on the football team, but more often than not, he'd cut practice to spend time with us at the beach or exploring the woods. There was one time that Dave invited a few of his friends, but when he realized they were getting too rowdy, sent them away and spent the rest of the evening relaxing. Just the 3 of us by the fire. Sarah was a bit similar to Dave. She was taller than I and relatively athletic. She had long blonde hair, which was typically accompanied with a beanie and her aviators. Sarah and I had been friends since grade school. She was the first person to approach me on my first day and never left my side. She was never one for popularity or really didn't have a lot of friends like Dave, but kept the people that mattered close, and I admired that. I knew that she wanted so badly to get out of this small town and see California's bustling cities, but had no way to get there. Most people wouldn't be able to tell from a distance, but we weren't exactly well off. Nobody in this town was, and anyone who said otherwise was probably lying. A majority of employment came from the fish plants and lumber, of course, but there were, of course, the convenience stores and fast food stops that dotted Main Street. I didn't know many rich people, actually only one, my cousin Lindsay. I don't know if she was really rich, but her car was worth triple of all of our cars combined, so I guess it's significant. I spent 5 years saving every penny for my camera. A small point and shoot that had scratches littered around the frame, but it helped make memories permanent. We'd go out to the corner store and get some of the best photos printed every couple of months, and each plastered them around our rooms. "I found this bottle washed up on the shore a few feet away," I replied, holding out the little bottle for all to see. Dave picked it up and held it to his eye, mimicking a pirate, then handed it to Sarah. Sarah took the small slip out and began to examine it. "Coordinates," I said. "Somewhere near our city, I suppose?" Dave grabbed his backpack and pulled out a small map of our hometown. I completely forgot he had that, but it had lines intersecting throughout the map, showing the latitude and longitude of landmarks and beaches in the area. "Right." He paused for a moment, double-checking that he was correct. Here." Dave pointed to an area indistinguishable from the sea of trees in the middle of the forest. "Maybe there's some secret treasure," Sarah said. We all shared a laugh, etching a smile on my face. In a sense, I wanted to see what was there, especially since it was so close to our town. It would be a fun adventure to take together. Since Dave was leaving for college soon to play football in a big city south of us, and Sarah would likely leave eventually to travel the Westwell Coast, it may be one of our last adventures. We were all seniors in high school. Senior year is amazing with a hint of bitterness. You make all these memories with people you love and care about, but forget that in a few months. You'll never see 90% of them again. I knew for a fact I'd keep in contact with Dave and Sarah. I never felt scared around them. I never felt lonely when we talked all night long, watching the stars dance in the sky above. I never felt sad or upset. My mother always said that God has a plan with every person you meet in life. I was never a hugely religious person, but maybe she was right. Maybe these people were meant for me. After an hour or so of discourse, the sun had completely set for the night. We had packed up the things and moved them into my car, grabbing enough food and snacks for a night away from civilization. The plan was relatively straightforward. Head into the forest, check out the coordinates, and camp there for the night. I grabbed my camera and pack, and we set off. It was northwest, towards the mountains in Canada. Dave estimated that it wouldn't take us more than 3 hours to hike there. I was extremely eager to see what the coordinates led to. I could have sworn we explored every bit of this forest, day and night, sun and storm. Like I said, there's always something new to be stumbled across. Eventually, the scene around me began to look off. Not 5 minutes ago, I recognized every tree, every rock that lined the path, and the little cave by the stream we used to catch fish in. But the trees around were unfamiliar. The grass patches looked foreign, and I couldn't find a hint of wildlife anywhere around. No tracks, no droppings, nothing but trees, grass, and dirt. "Have we ever been here before?" I asked, beginning to slow my pace as I looked around for any sign of familiarity. Dave laughed, responding, "Of course, Ams. We've been everywhere in this damn forest at least twice." I smiled. The years of exploring flashed through my vision. But I asked again. "Something feels off, Davy. Are you positive? Do you see any notable landmarks around us?" He began his reply confident. "Of course, you see over there, but slowly lost that confidence as he realized I was right. "The dirt. Yeah. No, I think this place is new." Sarah gave me a puzzled look, but we kept on. The general location the coordinates were guiding us to was only a quarter mile or so ahead, and I was desperate to see what we might find there. Maybe a cool abandoned home, or an intricate cave system we could smoke weed in, or something I'd never thought we'd stumble across in the woods. In a sense, I was correct. A few moments later, we reached a patchy area where the trees seemed to end. It was almost a circle of emptiness, the perfect area for stargazing in the woods, or building a fire watchtower, or frolicking around in the sun. It seemed mostly barren, except a small pile of rocks to the right. "Over there!" Sarah and I practically shouted at the same time, looking at a little gray fox that ran behind the rocks. The first thing that came to my mind was that there was a cave in there. You got the flashlights, yeah? I asked Dave, who froze at the question. I guess he forgot the flashlights. How the fuck did we walk 3 hours in the forest with nothing but a little phone lamp? Dave said, laughing. Well, we can't explore a cave with no flashlights, so I guess we'll go back. Hell no, I'm not walking all the way back, I stammered, already tired from the long hike and lack of quality shoes protecting my feet. I'll stay here and take some photos, and look for the gray fox. You guys can run back and get them. Are you sure, Amber? You were the one who mentioned that it looks unfamiliar. We should probably stick together. I don't want you to get scared. Or worse. I laughed. Scared? Nah, I'll manage. Go along, get the lights, and bring extra batteries. I'll take a nap or something if I get bored. I have a sleeping bag. I didn't really have a sleeping bag, but I didn't want to walk all the way back, and I didn't want Dave or Sarah to have to go alone. It can get lonely in the woods, especially when there's nobody around. Guess I should have thought about that for myself as well. They left, and I spent a few minutes taking photos of all the trees and the lack of. I'd lived in this town all my life, but never knew about this expanse of emptiness. Which is weird, because you'd assume that something of this size would appear on a satellite map. I guess the most rational reasoning I could come up with is something used to be here, but was destroyed, and nobody ever updated the satellite view of the area. The stars were shining beautifully out. Like I mentioned earlier, it was supposed to be cloudy, but I guess the sky gods blessed us with a beautiful, clear night. I could see the constellations that my dad used to show me when I was a kid, and smiled at the thought. Like a flash before my eyes, I saw a sly gray fox dart out from the trees to my left and towards the rock pile. I immediately took after him, camera in hand, trying to figure out where their hideaway was. The little fox led me back to the rock pile and ducked under a thick brush. I assumed that was their little nest, but after deeper examination, I saw there was a walkway leading down below the rocks. The brush that the fox went through was located right in the middle of the rock pile. It seemed to be a cave, and the pile of rocks was the mouth. I had my phone light, albeit very dull and probably not enough to make sure I didn't fall. But I would be there for 5 hours, and the anticipation was going to kill me if I didn't check this out. I pulled out my camera and a small cigarette lighter for light, and began to crawl my way down the dirt ramp where the fox had gone. The cave had a must similar to that in the bottle. Old, dirty, like nobody had set foot in here in decades. The earth was damp with moisture, and the pungent smell of dirt was as impossible to escape as the fish guts on shore. Actually, it was quite nice. This was the first time I'd ever been totally free from the smell of fish when exploring the woods near the shore. I guess we'd gone a lot further than I thought. I proceeded onward until I reached a two-way split at the end of the long ramp down. I felt a twinge of panic as I realized how truly steep the ramp down was. Much steeper than anyone would be able to run. The path to the left seemed to head upwards, while the right path kept going down. While I waited to get back up to the surface and wait for Sarah and Dave, I also wanted to see what was further down. So lighter in hand, I journeyed onward. Eventually, I stumbled and dropped the camera as I tumbled through the narrow tunnel, hitting my head on rock after rock. My vision faded to black as I continued to roll and slide downwards into the darkness. I woke up in a cold sweat. Everything was disorienting and I fumbled around looking for my camera, or the lighter I used to get down, but both were nowhere to be found. I was enveloped in total darkness. There wasn't a hint of light anywhere to be found. I gasped for breath in the thick air. It was expected in a tunnel underground, and slowly tried to get up. It took a few tries before I was able to hoist myself to eye level. The flat area I was in was much higher than the tunnel, considering I was able to stand up completely. I wasn't the tallest person in the world, but I stuck my arms up just to see how high it was, and found no greeting from the cold dirt that had constantly bumped my head in the past. Grabbing the small phone in my pocket, I used it to guide me to the wall and began to scope out the area. It appeared I was in some sort of huge circle. It took me minutes to get from end to end, and I wasn't walking very slowly. I didn't feel a single entrance or exit, so the question of how I ended up in there was hot on my mind. Then I froze. In front of my feet were bones. The biggest one was probably the size of my forearm, and there were 5 or 6 with not an ounce of flesh on them. I picked up my pace, ready to leave the cave and head back to the car with Dave and Sarah, when I tripped on my backpack that was a few feet away from the bones. It was an old school backpack. It looked to be 20 or so years old, with scratches and tears plenty. I tore open one of the holes and found pretty typical school materials. A notebook, pencils, an old calculator, and a lighter with a pack of cigarettes. But as I opened the front pocket, my heart sank. There was a small glass bottle. There was a small glass bottle, much like the one I had found, with a little slip of paper inside. Tears flooded my eyes as I opened the cork and shook out the small slip of paper that displayed the same coordinates that I followed. This place was a death trap. I threw the bottle down, shattering it on a rock that jetted out from the earthy floor. Turning my dim phone to the brightest setting possible, I sprinted through the rest of the perimeter, desperately pleading for there to be a tunnel I could crawl out of. But I came full circle. There was no exit. And there was no escape. A sudden noise from above my head stopped the tears that began to drip from my eyelids, as the luminescence of my cell phone guided my eyes towards the top of the cavern. The ceiling of the death trap was hundreds of feet up. The entirety of the room was dirt and was perfectly circular. About halfway to the top, there seemed to be some kind of entrance. I screamed in joy and began to run toward the side of the room that I could try to scale to reach the pathway. But once again, fell backwards in fear when I came to the realization I was not alone in this cavern. Above me, a huge creature that encompassed the entirety of the cavern's circumference had begun to stir. It was jet black and had huge legs that extended from its massive body to the edges of the cave. At first, it appeared to be a spider, but it had 12 huge legs, the size of small trees. It was extremely hairy, like a tarantula, and its mouth was huge. It looked around, looked directly at me with bright red eyes, and began creeping down. I began to scream in fear as I tried to look for some way out or some rock I could dislodge to hide myself. but the creature crawled down further and further until it began to feel its warmth against my chest. It was right on top of me. I screamed and flailed my arms as a spider-like creature placed its heavy legs on my breasts, pinning me from moving anywhere. It started to shoot a warm web-like material on my legs, and I remained helpless as I was being wrapped alive in spider silk. I didn't know a lot about spiders. Honestly, I don't even know if it was a spider, or some other demonic creature that resembled a spider. But I knew that when spiders wrapped their prey in silk, it was to kill it, then save the meal for later. I nearly vomited at the thought that I may be trapped in its lair for days, weeks, months, until I had been fully digested. The only sign of other life was the backpack and bones I had found earlier, which looked pretty old. This creature had not eaten in 20 years. It was hungry. The creature let out an ear-piercing howl, causing the cavern to tremble and loose dirt to fall onto my body from the ceiling. I took this as an opportunity to strike, punching its thick leg and causing it to stumble. The spider quickly regained composure and tried to put one of its hairy legs on my throat, but I veered the top half of my body to the side. Despite tears flooding my eyes, I could still see the spider's huge legs and began to violently beat the closest one to me. It howled and howled, trying to pin me down, but I kept veering my body from left to right to avoid its trap. The legs were thicker than I expected, but I knew they would break eventually. I heard a cracking sound as the leg I was unleashing all of my anger at split in half, sending the spider collapsing into me. It had to have weighed at least 300 pounds. I struggled to breathe with its weight against me. The creature's eyes were right at my eye level, so I punched and punched until it began to retreat. The spider vomited this disgusting mixture of animal guts and saliva onto me, coating my body in a red paste, and tried desperately to regain its composure. But I knew I was winning. I used the sharp edge of my phone to rip away the silk that kept my legs tied down, and pushed myself up from the creature's belly. Lying down, it was almost taller than I was standing up. I stumbled backwards in fear, but used this to my advantage, grabbing a boulder and hoisting it onto the creature's head. It shook in agony and let out one more howl of anguish before crawling up the side wall towards the ceiling. I collapsed to the ground, struggling to catch my breath. Though I won the battle, I was far from home. I hastily made my way towards the side of the cavern with a small opening about 30 feet in the air. Stepping through spider guts, vomit, and torn spider webs was no fun, but I pushed the bile down and proceeded onward. There were a few rocks sticking out that looked stable, so I followed them up. As I had climbed 3 rocks up, I noticed a very dark structure just a few inches higher than I could reach. A ladder. I ripped the thick jacket off my chest and tossed it around the rusted metal rung of the ladder. Using the strength from adrenaline pumping in my body, I pulled myself upwards and scurried up the ladder towards the hole. The demonic creature seemed to be angry at this and began stirring, just as I was about to clear the ladder into the tunnel. But I kept on, knowing that if I were to stumble, demise would be inevitable. The narrow tunnel was pitch black and musty, much like the original tunnel I started down. I scanned the floor for tracks of any kind with the now dim phone light that I hoped would be my last until freedom. But I couldn't find a single footprint or animal track. It was evident that I was the first to ever escape. I kept on, stumbling past rock after rock, trying not to let myself collapse from the exhaustion. The tunnel stopped, leading to another cavern. This one was significantly different. Around the room were bottles all around, with little slips of paper inside. There were a few candles lighting the dark cavern, and I could see there wasn't another person to be found. The bottles were all the same. Light glass, cork at the top, small slip of paper with black ink, reading the coordinates I was standing at. I wanted to smash every single bottle, to protect anyone from ever setting foot in this damn labyrinth again. But fear instructed me not to. There was a small wooden door behind the table where the writer would sit, which reminded me of the doors they have in dungeons. Heavy, iron-gated, dark wood, rusty hinges. I tried to open it, but it would not budge. Suddenly, my thoughts got really, really dark. I felt over-encumbered with grief and sadness. I wanted to die. I wanted to hurt myself. Something was telling me that I was no good, that I'm not supposed to make it out, that I would never be the same, that my friends don't care. This flood of voices in my head seemed to correlate with the flickering of the candles. As they got intense, the candle flickered rapidly. I noticed a change in lighting. To the left, a candle that shined bright was now nothing but ash and smoke. The candles around me slowly began to turn out as the thoughts in my head started getting darker and darker. I began looking for a knife around the small room I was in. I wanted to kill myself, to end this wretched suffering, to just get my life over with and never have to deal with this creepy labyrinth again. I was afraid of the huge spider, afraid that that would be my reality. I guess that was crippling me. The realization that I may never make it out alive. That no matter how far I get, I may get dragged back from a huge creature to die a slow and painful death. As 3 candles remain, something clicked in my head. I need to get out of here. Taking a rock that was positioned by the bottles, I beat the rusty metal hinge again and again until it cracked and fell to the ground. As the 3rd candle blew out, I heard footsteps echoing from down the narrow tunnel where the creature slept. I beat the bottom hinge harder and harder, using every last bit of strength and force, and threw the heavy wooden door down as the 2nd candle extinguished to flames. The moment I escaped from that room and sprinted up the cobblestone staircase, the intrusive thoughts disappeared. I didn't have a single suicidal urge or depressing thought. The only thing in my head was the inclination to keep going upwards, that freedom was near. I approached another Y intersection, one leading upwards and one leading to the side. I kept on. I didn't care what else was in this tunnel. I wanted out. Knees screaming, I continued onward, sprinting up those stairs faster than Dave ever could when he was playing football, or Sarah ever could while on a jog. Faster than I'd ever ran before. Faster than anyone had ever ran before. I knew that I was close. I had a feeling deep down. But it felt like I continued on forever. I had to have been running for at least 10 minutes when I finally collapsed to the ground under pressure. I wasn't strong enough to keep going. No matter how hard I tried to run up those stairs, I couldn't make it another step. A moment before, I had strength far superior than any human I'd ever seen, but it all seemed to break down. I looked around me, but saw nothing. The doors with small lanterns hanging over them. No monsters chasing me from down the stairs. No trap door that leads to the surface. Just darkness. And the cobblestone stairs I lie on, illuminated by the flickering light of my phone. I can't stop now, I told myself, hoisting my weak body up one more step and proceeding to collapse again. The adrenaline must have worn off, as my body was useless. I could barely lift myself up the stairs, let alone sprint to freedom. There were no supports around to try and pull myself up, just dirt and stone. Nevertheless, I kept pushing. I had this terrible feeling that something was behind me. Maybe this was part of the labyrinth. The stairs up wear people out so much that the predator can slowly fall behind and reach its prey when it collapses. The pain paid off. I regained a burst of energy as I pulled my screaming muscles up 2 more steps and reached a small room with nothing but a small metal hatch. I pushed the hatch upward with all my might and saw thousands of bright stars shining above me. Crying tears of relief and joy, I pulled my bruised, broken body above the hatch and was on top of the rock pile I'd entered before. I saw a sly gray fox hiding behind the tree and threw my useless phone at the bastard, watching it scurry back into the forest. Nobody else is dying in this fucking cavern, I yelled, watching the creature distance itself from me as much as possible. I lay on the rocks for what felt like hours. The cold didn't bother me. The wind didn't affect me one bit. My hoodie had been left behind, and my pants had torn over and over in the jagged cavern. But I didn't care. I was free. "Hams?" I heard a familiar voice call out from behind the trees. It was Dave. "Dave!" I called out in a raspy voice, before coughing like a smoker as my friends watched me from a distance. "Are you ready to explore the rocks? We got the lights now and I brought your sleeping bag, you little liar." Dave chuckled and threw the sleeping bag at me, knocking me down. I shook my head violently, trying so hard to express myself, but my voice was just on the brink of death. I motioned to get up to hug them, but collapsed in pain and exhaustion. "You okay, Amber?" Sarah shouted, before shining her flashlight down to the mouth of the cave that just tried to kill me. I began crawling towards them, tears dripping from my eyelids, pleading for them to get me out of there. "Please, get me out of here," I croaked, unsure if they could hear me. Dave's eyes widened when he saw me, dirty and bruised, but I don't think he realized what had happened. Dave whispered something to Sarah and she nodded her head in agreement. "We're gonna go explore for a minute. I promise it won't take long, Ams. Can you hold my backpack while we're down there?" I tried so hard to scream in protest, but something was stopping the words from coming from my mouth. I tried so hard to speak, but I couldn't croak out a word. Dave brought his backpack to me, and I grabbed his hand, trying to pull him back, but he repulsively pulled back. "What the fuck is wrong with you, Amber? It's just a cave. We've been in them before." "She must have smoked all her dope when we left. I mean, what else is there to do? I'm sure she didn't explore the caves alone or anything silly like that." Sarah laughed, lighting her flashlight and proceeding to the brush where I began my journey to hell. All I could do is sob as I watched my 2 best friends enter the mouth of the cave, their voices fading into nothing as they went deeper and deeper down the labyrinth of hell.
Chronicler here. We here at Creepy Spaghet would like to thank Exploring with Zack for allowing us to tell their story. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe to stay updated on these terrible tales, and make sure to check out the author in the links below. If you're interested in having your story narrated, be sure to reach out to our humble overseer as he continues his journey to pull the darkest stories from the infinite depths of the internet. Until next time, fiends, and remember, we are darkness.